Hi guys, I'm going to review the answers to all the questions for chapters 1, 2, and 3 so that you have this video you can watch before you take your quiz. So, okay, here we go. Number 1, what does Nick say is gorgeous about Gatsby in paragraph 4? You're going to see this definitely on the quiz. In this paragraph, he talks about specifically the way he smiles and like the way he is super unique compared to all the other people in the town. He's like their opposite. I mean, he still represents all of the things that they love, money, but he is just more genuine in a way. In that same paragraph, Nick tells us that his disillusionment with mankind, in your opinion, is it Gatsby or something else that causes this disillusionment? It's definitely something else that causes the disillusionment, but it is related to Gatsby. So if you have something along those lines, that is 100% correct. We don't really know what it is yet, but the story is meant to tell you what it is. So pay attention because he is currently telling you what it is that really makes him hate humans. What's Nick's socioeconomical background? He comes from an extremely rich family. Not only are they rich, but they have these really amazing historical lines. Really accomplished human beings. When Nick returns from war, why does he decide to go east? He goes east to become a bondsman. It's really important to him to sort of establish himself on his own. How is West Egg different than East Egg? There's so many ways. The general idea behind this is that East Egg is where old money comes from. It was more refined people. And West Egg is where people with new money go, and they aren't very good at handling money yet. It reminds me so much of the Titanic movie, which would fit perfectly in with this time period, where they don't like that woman who has new money. People just think that they don't know how to handle themselves yet. So that's the main difference. Before meeting him, what do we learn about Tom Buchanan? He went to college with Nick, our narrator. Nick never really liked him much. He was super into polo and all these different sports, and that was pretty much like the major accomplishment of his life. There was, after that, I mean, he kind of just peaked in college, and that was the end. Find the specific words used to describe Daisy's most notable feature. I literally don't know the answer to that. I have to look in my book, and my son hid it, so it's not on the quiz. At this point, what is your opinion of Daisy? It's an opinion. So what are you guys thinking about her? Is she an amazing, wonderful creature? Is she vapid and shallow? What do you guys think about her? At this point, why does Nick observe there was something pathetic in Tom's concentration? He says this because he thinks Tom is very stupid. And the things that Tom says, he just disagrees with wholeheartedly. So he just doesn't really relate to him. We find out that Tom has a woman in New York. What unflattering feature of Jordan Baker's personality is revealed? She loves gossip. Loves it. What 3 sentences indicate that Nick thinks Daisy's cynical outburst is fake? I'd have to look. I literally don't remember. It's not on the quiz. What has the reader left to think about Daisy's emotional state and her relationship with Tom? You're supposed to think it's really in a bad place, and it is. She seems so distraught. She talks about him hitting her and causing damage to her hand. She also talks about how she has had a really terrible time, and we also see that he's cheating on her. I mean, who wants this relationship? No one. Who is Jordan Baker, and what has Nick heard about her? She's a golfer. She's a really famous golfer. She's super good at golfing, and so Nick is really excited to have finally figured out who she is after he finally puts together her name. What is the reader left to think about? As Nick drives away from their house, he experiences a number of conflicting emotions. Why does he feel touched? Why does he feel confused and disgusted? He feels touched because of Daisy's warmness towards him, but he feels confused and disgusted by the fakeness of everything that he saw in that house. The fake relationship, the fake way they cared, everything about them. The green light that Gatsby is staring at is mentioned several more times, and assumes a symbolic significance. Where do you think that green light might be coming from? I'm asking you to predict there, so I'm not going to answer that question. Okay, let's go to chapter 2. I think it's up, actually. Chapter 1, chapter 2. Loading. Okay. Chapter 2. The description of the Valley of Ashes opens chapter 2 on a literal level. What is the Valley of Ashes and what might it represent on a symbolic level? Valley of Ashes is pretty much like where Queens is now. It's on its way into New York City and it's becoming built up slowly, but at this time during the 1920s, it is not that well built up. So it's like this really beat down, slummy area where those low middle class maybe people live. What might it represent on a symbolic level? The Valley of Ashes. Think about that name. Ashes are usually burnt down items. So like think of like destruction and chaos. I would say those are things that it represents, or maybe just like the downfall of mankind. Compare and contrast these characters, George Wilson and Tom, and Myrtle Wilson and Daisy. So George and Tom are complete opposites. Tom's super assertive, George is super submissive. Tom is rich, George is poor. Tom is conniving and crafty, and George is honest. Myrtle and Daisy. Myrtle is fat, Daisy is skinny. Myrtle is saucy and vivacious, and Daisy is very well kept and quiet. They are complete polar opposites. There's a special literary term for this. It's called a foil. It is meant to point out the opposite's most important feature to the reader. So we're supposed to really pick up on here from looking at these secondary characters, George and Myrtle, that Tom is very, very arrogant and that Daisy is very of the old world mentality. She's very well kept. In what way does Fitzgerald indicate that Myrtle Wilson is not an intellectual? The things that she reads are very trashy magazines, the way she speaks, the choices she makes. When she talks about the dog, she like really has no idea what she's talking about. At the party in the apartment, what social classes are represented and by whom? You have the upper class with Tom, the middle class maybe more so with Nick, even though he does come from a rich family. Definitely with the McKees, they're more middle class. Lower class, low middle class would be probably more Myrtle and her cousin. And in what social class does Nick belong? I'd say like mid upper class. Again, I'm only saying that because he does come from a rich family, but his own money worth is not that high. In what way is the party in the apartment different from the dinner at the Buchanans in chapter 1, and in what ways is it similar? Okay, so the party at the Buchanans' house is very refined, tasteful. They have their before dinner cocktails. They sit down to an elegant meal. They have their dinner, and then they have their end cocktails, and they're off on their way. It's very, very socially structured, appropriate. The party in the city is this rip-roaring, drunken, crazy moment, and it is not anything refined about it. What's similar is the amount of drinking. There's a lot of drinking at both parties. The fact that Nick is at both events, so he is like kind of being able to give you both worlds of Toms, and of course these represent the Toms living two different lives. Okay, the McKees appear in chapter 2. What does Fitzgerald bring them? Why does he bring them into the story? It's definitely to point out that people don't have to live by specific gender norms. Mr. McKee is clearly gay, even though he's married, and Mrs. McKee seems to be a lesbian. I don't even know. We definitely know Mr. McKee is gay because he sleeps with Nick at the end of this party. If you didn't read this chapter, you just got very excited to read it, I'm sure. Okay, notice how often and in what context Dr. Eckelberg's eyes are mentioned and what may be significant of these eyes. These eyes are always watching the people, right? They're not just there above, beautiful, shining. They're they're always judging or looking down and watching the people. So I think it's really important to notice that. And I think also, why is A significant? They're sort of judging him, everyone. They're like God in a sense. Do you think Tom will leave Daisy for Myrtle and support your answer? This is really an opinion, so again, I can't really answer that. All right, the last chapter that you had to read. All right. Find the support for this statement. Gatsby's parties were expensive, elaborate, raucous affairs, and they were not gatherings of his friends who brought warmth and happiness with them. I think it's very clear when they say that the people who come to Gatsby's parties don't even care if they meet him or not. They're just there because they want to be at a party, that they are not his friends, that they are over-the-top elaborate things. I mean, he has bands playing in every room, use so much alcohol, freshly squeezed oranges. I forget how many pounds of oranges he says that they squeeze, but so much orange for their cocktails. It is a crazy, crazy party. What is Nick's, and Gatsby doesn't really attend it. He's just kind of sort of sitting off to the corner by himself and then magically appears most towards the end of the party. What's Nick's opinion of the people at the parties when he says that once there, the guests conducted themselves according to the rules of behavior associated with amusement parks? He obviously thinks they're maniacs because they are just doing whatever they want and acting like they're at a little park, like a little crazy shindig that's has no rules. Explain Nick's comment. It was a testimony to the romantic speculation he, Gatsby, inspired, that there were whispers about him from those who had found little that it was necessary to whisper about in the world. Okay, so obviously these people love whisper. They love gossip. That's number one, okay? And they don't know anything about Gatsby. It's because they don't care to know him. They don't even know who he is when they're at the party, like I mentioned before. But they do love the gossip. They do love the rumors. And he does obviously spark these types of rumors because he is so elaborate and over the top with his party. So people do kind of want to talk about where this money comes from, who this man is, but they don't really care who he is because they just want to use his money in his house for these parties. Why did Jordan and Nick leave the group from East Egg? Because they are snooze, boring, and there are men in the group that are interested in Jordan, but she is not interested in them. What is the great quality in Gatsby's smile? It was one of those rare smiles with a quality of eternal reassurance in it. It concentrated on you with an irresistible prejudice in your favor. It understood you, believed in you, assured you. So the way he looks at people is just this like empowering feeling that he believes that you can do anything just by smiling at you. It's quite a beautiful sentiment. What do Gatsby and Nick have in common? Honesty, integrity, where they are from. What does Fitzgerald subtly wish to convey about Gatsby when he has Nick say, I was looking at an elegant young roughneck whose elaborate formality of speech just missed being absurd. Sometime before he introduced himself, I had gotten a strong impression that he was picking his words with care. That the way he speaks is some kind of act. He's trying too hard. There's something not quite natural by the way he speaks, and so it makes it somewhat unbelievable. What do you suppose that Jordan does not believe? Why do you suppose that Jordan does not believe Gatsby when he says that he attended Oxford College in England? I would say because there's so many rumors, it's hard to believe any one. Of course, just looking back at what Nick says about the way he speaks, it's very hard to believe that he would have gone to Oxford and be trying so hard to act like a certain person. It makes you just think everything about him isn't true. In what way is Gatsby's behavior at the party quite unlike the behavior of most of his guests? He is not drunk, he is quiet and subdued, and he is kind of sitting back in the corner, like I mentioned, and everybody else is acting cray. What do you think Fitzgerald wishes to convey about Gatsby's parties through the incident with the drunks in the car and the husbands and the wives arguing? That it is still 1920. Husbands had a very specific role as the breadwinners, the sole decision makers of their households, and the women they did not have that option, and so they just kind of complained and lived unhappy lives. What is the purpose of the last section of this chapter? That begins reading over what I've written so far. It's a reminder to you, the reader, that this story is being told in a flashback, and it also shows us that he's writing it. So originally, when we talked in our group the other day, we talked about how he ends up in an insane asylum and he tells this story, and now we know he's not just telling the story there, he is writing it down. So he's essentially writing your book.